What's going on, everybody? Beyond Terrain here for another episode. We got episode 8. We got Eat Raw Meat today. Look forward to this episode. Eat Raw Meat has been on the Raw Problem Lab for 5.5 years now, going strong, and is a fountain of knowledge on this subject. So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. We're going to get into the diet, probably get into some other things too. So we'll see how this goes. I want to thank you for being here.
Sure. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I think uh, what you're doing with your podcast is important. Speaking about these topics about terrain theory, the more people we have doing that, obviously, the more eyes and ears it gets to. So, yeah, happy to help.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I really like how the primal diet kind of fits in it because I feel like it is kind of centered around this model of like living in with nature and not against it, right? And doing what's natural. And so I really like this perspective, and I think it works really well for it. This it's like all of my learning has led me here. So yeah. So I like to ask my guests at the start of the podcast. I like to kind of get them to define what health means to them and how it looks like. And so we have a little baseline and we can work from there. So if you don't mind, just kind of give your definition of what health is and what that looks like for you.
Well, I think in terms of health, there's several components, and I saw some of Wes and Derek's, interviews, and I think they did a pretty good job encapsulating that. It's not just about, what you're eating. Obviously that's a part of it, but it's also, your mental, and I guess you could say spiritual sort of components as well, which aren't necessarily corrected by just doing a specific kind of diet. I've been pretty lucky myself. The biggest health problems that I've had were pretty severe eczema, and I have tinnitus as well. And that's the eczema, you can see it's like something's wrong with somebody, but with tinnitus, it's kind of like you can't see, you don't know if somebody has it, and it's kind of difficult because it can stress you out, and you want to avoid certain environments, maybe with noise, or certain professions. But I think I'm grateful for the health that I do have, and I'm working on improving my health with the primal diet. Um, I do work outside in the summers, so I do stay active that way. Some labor, so I think exercise is important, even if it's just
Mm.
a little bit, like as much as you can. Um, so I think being content with where you're at, I think, is a pretty good picture of health, and that might seem pretty general and subjective, but I think for someone to ascribe a perfect objective kind of health, I think I don't really know if that's quite possible in this day and age, because so many people, especially people who are on the primal diet, they're very fixated on, 40 years or 20 years or whatever to completely detox and then rebuild your body, and then you can have perfect health. And with the amount of, pollution from the pharmaceutical industry, with, choosing my words carefully there, um, I think people, I don't know if people will actually really have perfect health. I think you can have really good health. Don't get me wrong. I'm not being
Mm.
pessimistic, but I think, um, don't let perfect be the enemy of, good enough, so to speak. So I don't think I'll ever fully detox. I've had, 50, you know, of those.
Yeah, the things,
And I
yeah.
don't really know, and people ask me, how are you still alive? I'm like, I have the skin on my teeth, I suppose. Just have a strong constitution, a strong body, and it's like I'll probably never get all that out of my system, and I'm okay with that. I just got to
Mm.
try to live the best life I can and reduce exposure to things that are not good for you. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't really touch tap water except to, wash my dishes. I use the bath formula for the hot bath, so I neutralize a lot of the poisons in there. Um, I
Hmm.
don't, when I'm working, I paint a lot. So I wear a respirator. So work safety is really important. You wear like some face protection for your eyes, some goggles, a face shield, a respirator, for doing all kinds of things. If you're around cleaning solutions, if you're around paint, if you're around epoxy, whatever, it's always good to have something like a respirator with you on hand because let's say, there's a car accident, there's a lot of smoke or a spill and there's fumes and you don't have anything to protect yourself with. So I always preach, work safety and investing in things that can help you protect against some of those obstacles and challenges in our industrial environment. So I think, kind of leading astray there, but yeah, I mean, just in terms of health, it's kind of like whatever's, kind of working for you. If you know it's not working for you and you're living in denial, that's your choice. Everybody has to make their own choices, and it's kind of hard to, I don't want to judge or chastise anybody for their choices necessarily. My loved ones, I might say something to because I really care about them. I think if it's your loved ones, you might have a responsibility. But like I use this example a lot. I know two vegans. Uh, well, actually three, but the two I know are brother and sister. They were raised without pharmaceuticals, without anything, very low tox lifestyle, and they were raised
Hmm.
vegan. I'm pretty sure they were breastfed, but they're vegan and they're really healthy people. And they talk to me about how they interact with people who, had those pharmaceuticals, how like people just don't seem right. And they're like, well, we got to be patient. But one of them, he plays college baseball for like a D3 school. He's a pitcher or something.
Oh
And,
yeah,
you always hear about, oh, vegans, they never make it. They're not healthy. But, I know these two people and they're healthy. And I know an older fellow who's in his 60s who's been mostly vegan his whole life, never had any pharmaceuticals in his life. Pretty great guy, pretty healthy guy. So again, like I said, there's more to being healthy than just what kind of diet you're on.
yeah,
Mitigating your exposure to bad things is very important. It's probably even more important, and that goes with mental stress too, right? I mean, that's stress is a big thing. I was watching a National Geographic documentary about chimpanzees, or no, it was about stress, and they were studying chimpanzees, and they found that certain chimps or whatever primates they were looking at had a hierarchy, and the lower hierarchies had more stress, and their arteries were clogged because of cordo something roids that are produced from the adrenaline and the stress, and that led to hardening of the arteries. It wasn't a diet related thing; it was a
sure.
stress related thing. They didn't find that in
Hmm.
the primates in the higher hierarchy. So you got to kind of look at it from all angles.
Yeah. Well, it is a little bit of an abstract question, and but you did a great job answering, in my opinion. I agree with pretty much everything that you said there. So, you know, it's kind of a central thing at this point. Every person that's come on, it's always more than diet. And like you said, like there are people out there, even though they are on a raw vegan diet, they do quite well for themselves. Like there's this one fella actually when I was getting into kind of the terrain model of health, and it was John Rose, and he's been raw vegan for a very, very long time. And he talks about how germs don't cause disease and doesn't take pharmaceuticals and, minimizes pollution and, in his mind, maximizes energy and nutrients through his food, right? He eats like the raw vegan diet. And he does quite well for himself. He's in his 60s now, and he's cut with a six pack, whatever. If that's an indication of health, I don't know. But it's funny how it's like it's more than just diet. And I do think that diet does play that role though too, right? In being able to help see clearly. And I think if anything, it really for me comes down to minimizing toxins and maximizing nutrients. And I will say I do think that more raw animal-based diet is more conducive for nutrient intake for sure. I think it's kind of objective, but it's hard to discount these other people. So I guess we can get into, what does the primal diet look like for you, and even beyond diet, like you mentioned hot baths or things like that. So, what is the, primal lifestyle?
Well, um, I could give a little bit of a facetious answer, but I think I won't. Um, Basically, if you want to know about it, I suggest you read the books. Um, you can find them on Amazon. You can find them on the Primal Diet or primaldiet.net. And those are, that's where I would go. But
Mm.
essentially,
And
it revolves.
those are
I'm sorry.
Agenus Vonderplanet's books, right?
Yes,
That
I
you're
forgot
referring
to
to?
mention. Yeah,
Yeah.
Arjunus Vonderplanets. He created the primal diet through his years of research and experimentation on himself and
Yeah.
clients. And he writes all about it in We Want to Live and the Recipe for Living Without Disease. We Want to Live is more of a narrative based book, which does have a lot of good information in the back end. I find the narrative, you read it once, it's okay, but rereading it, it's kind of like it's a little cheesy, a little cliche, but I mean, there's some good information in there, especially when he's dealing with his son or some of his other clients. Certain food combinations, that are uh, very, I think, useful that might get overlooked. And every time I read the book, I always see something new. And when you're on the diet, your needs change, so you can't have a static diet, right? So you might start out with
Sure.
eating a set of some things in terms of the meat, the eggs, the dairy, vegetable juice. After a couple years you may need to make adjustments to that, the kind of meat you're eating, the ratios and the kind of vegetable juice you're having, the frequency of cheese, the amount of eggs. All of that is very dependent on what your body's healing and detoxing. So it definitely isn't a
Mm.
static diet, and it does take a lot of self knowledge and self care and reflection. Nobody knows their own body like you, so if you have a good idea of your medical history and your problems, you can pretty much figure out what you need to do, when you should be doing it, and listening to your intuition when things don't feel right or they start to stagnate. So essentially, there's a big eating schedule that's a recipe for living without disease, and it's called the General Daily Recommended Schedule, and it starts off with vegetable juice in the morning when you wake up, several ounces or so to maybe a cup or so, and then eggs, um, preferably, and then you would wait an hour or so. You would eat your raw meat, about a half pound to a pound, and then after that, you would have you could have like a lubrication formula or something. You'd wait. There's some spacing, which I think is pretty important between the vegetable juice and the meat. You definitely don't want to mix those because you can get a stomach
Mm.
ache. It'll reduce the effectiveness of the digestion. So wait an hour before meat with vegetable juice, and then after meat, wait 2 hours for vegetable juice. And if you're going to consume a milkshake or something, I'd wait 45 minutes after meat. And basically, you just kind of repeat that segment throughout the day. You would have more vegetable juice after your lubrication formula or whatever, and then you'd have more meat, and then you could have more vegetable juice, or you could have like a lubrication formula or a milkshake. Essentially, the lube formula and the milkshake are where you get a lot of the raw fat, which is very important on the diet. Then you want to eat like a tablespoon minimum of raw fat to 3 tablespoons or more of fat with a meat meal. So your body's using the energy of the fat instead of the meat, because you want the
Mm.
meat to be used for cellular regeneration. That's something that's only going to happen with the meat. So that's an important indication or important distinction there. Eggs throughout the day, you can never have too many eggs. That's in the book. And one thing that's changed is the raw unsalted cheese, which is cheese that hasn't been heated above cow temperature, that is made without salt. And
Hmm.
ideally, you want to eat that the first thing when you wake up to absorb everything that's dumped into your stomach overnight. Sometimes I find myself waking up at night, excuse me, and eating cheese because I have some indigestion. Then on my eggs or some milk, and then I'll get back to sleep. Um,
Hmm.
because after about 5 hours, your body starts to go into autophagy, fasting, and you'll consume your red blood cells. And You do that, I wake up with pretty good energy. I was never a big caffeine guy, but it always kind of made me very anxious, very jittery, very agitated. Made me feel kind of ill the next day. But now, since I've been doing the diet, I don't really, I have energy. I can wake up, I'm ready to go. I don't need to have my coffee. I don't need to have a tea or anything. So that's a pretty big
Yeah.
advantage of the diet. And then, as you mentioned, non-diet components, which would be like the hot baths. Technically, you could say it's part of the diet because anything you put on your
Yeah,
skin,
kind of.
you absorb into your body. Um,
Mm,
so, like when you're putting in ingredients, if you have municipal water, the tap water, um, putting in what I recommend now is 4 cups of milk, and that could be mostly skimmed. So, like I buy a gallon, I skim most of the cream. I'll leave a little bit in there. Um, I separate into 3 quarts, and then I'll put a quart in the tub. I do about half a cup or so, half a cup or less, about of apple cider vinegar. Um, And then I use dead sea salt. I prefer sun dried dead sea salt. Any sun dried sea salt is fine, but I just prefer using dead sea salt because it has a higher mineral concentration. The salt
mm,
helps to neutralize some toxins and pull stuff out of the body. It also helps keep the water warm. The apple cider vinegar helps neutralize the acidic metals, the milk neutralizing the alkaline metals. And the milk also feeds the skin. So that's why I was saying,
sure.
anything you put on your skin, like the motto I have is if you wouldn't put it on your skin, don't put it in your body. Or if you wouldn't put it in your body, don't put it on your skin, right? So like for me, when I'm painting, if I'm pretty good now, but if I get paint on me, I wash it off, immediately.
Yeah.
Usually I get it like on the gloves or my shirt. It's not a big deal, but it's important to think about that. Like even if you still use or are around, depending on someone's, if you live with parents or you have roommates, like these industrial kind of cleaners, you just kind of have to watch out. If you get them on your skin, that's not good. You should wash it off or try to avoid
Mm,
it. So anything like that. But essentially, that's what the primal diet is in a nutshell. Of course, I could go into the different kinds of meats and different kinds of, the difference between the cream and the butter, why there's a difference there. And, gaining weight, I guess, is another important aspect. You talked about a guy with a six pack. I've got a whole keg now. I used to have a six pack, but I gained 45, 50 pounds uh, once I was able to gain weight. It took me a while,
mm.
but couple like 2 years, and yeah, I feel great with more weight on my body, definitely. So
Yeah, and that's kind of a hot take too, eh? And it's one that I haven't really heard. And um, maybe you can elaborate more on that. I think you'd be more well versed in the benefits of that too, because and I think it's important to talk about because it's something that, I never heard about and I feel like a lot of people don't consider, but the
you
perspective that
mean,
I've heard so far is phenomenal, especially for like protecting against toxins and stuff. So yeah, maybe we can get into that a little bit more.
oh yeah, being a fatty? Well, I'm not like too fat. The difference is you see these people who are bloated up like a whale or a balloon, and that's really from a lot of the hydrogenated vegetable oils in
Mm,
modern diets. Those expand the most, and they stay in the body the longest. They're the hardest to get rid of. So, obviously, when you're eating raw fat, you don't have the expansion conundrum. Even with things like a
sure.
bone broth or a burger or pasteurized cheese or milk, a lot of those fats, they're still expanded, but they're not as much as the vegetable oils, but there's still more than the raw fat. And they're going to put on more, I guess to say, not mass, but bulk.
Mm,
So with the raw fat, I've put on a lot of mass. I haven't put on as much bulk. I walk around 188 and I look like I'm maybe 170. I don't look like I'm, almost 200 pounds. I want to try to get to 200 pounds, but it's just kind of a plateau there. Maybe this winter, I'll just go ham on the milkshakes and I'll get there. We'll see. But yeah, I was always skinny all my life, and that's really been a big detriment to my health. which I can see in my eyes. Iridology, that's another aspect. Um, but to digress, I was always kind of anxious when I was younger, and I was very skinny, almost underweight. I was never weak, but
Mm,
I was just kind of skinny, and I I just I kind of had a temper, and I just, yeah, the anxiety was a big thing, but mentally,
mm,
I used to worry a lot. Eventually, I got to a point where I didn't care, and maybe that was some depression, but it was like, I don't like, I'm not going to worry about that. I don't care. Like, who cares? So I feel like maybe there's a couple different ways to overcome that psychological barrier. Sometimes anxiety is excess of hormones, which is, raw fat. Hormones are made up mostly of fat, 60 to 80%. So in my mind, when your body has a craving for hormones, whether it's like adrenaline, testosterone, whatever, your body can be overproducing that to make up for what am I trying to say? A dietary lapse, a deficiency. So, I think, and that's why a lot of people, I think, tend to self-medicate, with substances or smoking, because that produces those hormones. It produces, you have those chemicals plus the hormones. So you kind of get addicted to that response, and the chemicals themselves in some cases, the caffeine, the nicotine, alcohol, even things like cannabis, and then, harder stuff, obviously. But it's, I think, when you have fat on your body, you might not be looking for that as much, because your body has the fat stores to deal with toxicity, and it has, energy stores if it needs them, if it really needs them. um, so, in my mind, like, I just feel better, and my fitness is, still pretty good. Like, I gained 45 pounds. I hardly work out anymore, but I was still doing, 5, 10 chin ups, pull ups, and I put on 45 pounds. I do a lot of wall stands, and I could still do those.
mm,
I haven't tried to do push-ups in a while on, handstand push-ups, but like, I do about 5, 10 of those. I used to be able to do 20, like when I was very lean and fit. Um, but I probably built out 5 now. But still, it's like the diet. You gain this weight, you eat the muscle meat. It helps you keep and retain muscle. It helps you keep and retain strength, and it may even help you gain a little strength, which is kind of what I'm wondering, is like, well, if I gain 45 pounds and I can still do this, does that mean I'm stronger, or does that mean I kept my strength? I don't really know. I'll have to experiment when I do like a weight cut, probably lose
mm,
20 pounds. And that's the thing too, is like, you have the weight, right? But you don't want to keep it for too long. I mean, you can shed it yourself by doing the weight loss schedule diet, which is, it's still a raw diet. It mostly consists of eggs and vegetable juice in the book, and then small amounts of meat for your meat meals, like a golf ball size or so. Um,
mm,
you are hungry a lot of the time. I found it takes about 2 weeks to get used to sort of like an eating pattern or diet, because I used to fast. I used to do one meal a day. I used to do intermittent fasting before I found this diet. And it was about 2 weeks for me to adjust to that kind of stuff, and 2 weeks to adjust to the primal diet. And then when I do the weight loss, it takes about 2 weeks to get used to that. But um, that's it's important to shed the weight too, because if you keep it on, you're just kind of storing those toxins. So, you're either gonna lose it, or your body. Well, no, you are gonna lose it, and you can either do it through eating less but still eating raw, or your body will go into a detox. And
mm.
as you talk about, the microbes, and what are they really doing? Are they making us sick? It's really more of just like a purging, a cleansing. Um, but it's important to have
Yeah.
weight, because it doesn't, just because you have weight or not, doesn't necessarily mean you won't detox. You can still detox and be underweight. And that's when you can have damage to your body, is when your body's expelling these poisons. You don't have any fat to protect anything on your body. Um,
Hmm.
so So, for a weight loss regimen, I wouldn't recommend somebody like I gain 45 pounds. I wouldn't lose 45 pounds. I'd probably only lose about 20 because I would probably feel miserable without it. So I would try to keep some of that.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so you mentioned muscle meats a couple times. Do you think what role does organ meats play? And I know that's a hot topic today too now with the whole carnivore movement and
So,
use it sparingly or what's the deal
yeah.
with that?
So when I first started the diet, I ate mostly red meat and I ate a lot of beef. Uh, I'd eat like chuck roast because it was pretty cheap. And tougher
Yeah.
meats build a stronger body. It's you
Hmm.
eat tough meats, it builds tough cells. Augenus mentioned, when he was talking to some natives, I guess, or people who had sled dogs, that I guess when he was with the Inuit people, that they fed the dogs the filet mignons and the tenderloins because it was soft meat, or the older folks got that. But everybody
Oh,
else
interesting.
ate the tougher muscle meats, and they gave the dogs the bones, which kind of offset the soft meats. So I ate a
Hmm.
lot of that. I also ate a lot of liver. I just started eating liver, and I felt like I was really feeling it. I was pretty starved for nutrients, especially coming off of fasting. Um, so I was like really into that, and I would make liver shakes, which is just blending up the liver with eggs and some milk and a little honey, and I would just drink it. And when you first do that, first time you eat any kind of meat, it's really you really feel it the most. And the liver was like I was like, wow. So I drank a lot of that. I was eating 3 to 5 pounds of liver a week, which is a lot, probably too much. And after a couple of years, honestly, I stopped having a taste for liver, and
Interesting.
I don't really eat a lot of liver today. If I eat liver, it's the high meat, the high liver I have that's been sitting in a
Oh,
jar,
yeah.
and it's so old. It's so old. It's like almost 2 years old at this point because I don't touch the stuff. I used to eat half a pound of the high meat a day. Like I'd have a jar of it. I'd make a lot of jars of it, and I would just like pour it in a bowl, and I would just eat all of it for dinner, and that'd be my dinner. So I kind of lost the taste for the high meat and the liver because I think it kind of did its job. Because after that, I was able to gain weight more easily. I had a problem with digesting and absorbing fats, and eating all that liver. I
Okay.
think it helped the liver. So if you have a problem with a specific gland or organ, it's not a bad idea to eat those glands and organs to help rejuvenate those parts of your body, because the muscle meat, if you think about like what a muscle is and where muscle is, it's like all over your body, right? But an organ, it's in one specific place. So an organ, all the proteins and amino acids are already assigned to a particular structure. So your body isn't going to be able to use them for other places in your body. They're just going to be able to use them for your organ. And it's an old concept in Chinese medicine too, to eat the body part of whatever's ailing you, liver, the brain, the pancreas, whatever. So I had good results with that, but like I said, yeah, I don't eat liver anymore hardly. I've thought
Hmm.
about it at the butcher, but I'm like, I just don't want to. I just don't need to. But in terms of amounts, 20% is a good, like, of your meat intake is a good barometer of you know what you need to eat as an organ. Obviously, like if you're eating too many organs and glands, that's it's not going to help you put on weight. I'm not going to say it's like a bad thing, but it maybe isn't the best thing because putting on the
Sure.
weight's important, but eating the organs and stuff isn't really going to help you do that. So you need to have muscle meats in there as well, whether it's white meat or red meat, it doesn't matter. And you want to eat it with, I would suggest to eat it with your meat meals. So like you have your chicken thighs or your swordfish or your chuck roast, and you would have some organs or gland with that, and then the raw
Mm.
fat, and then that would be like a complete meat meal. Um, and then, of course, I forgot to mention it earlier, is to eat. the cheese, like when I said, when you wake up, you eat it before the meat meals or a milkshake or eggs or anything if you can, 10 minutes before, and then you wait 10 minutes. So at 10 minutes, then you can eat your window, because that it picks up a lot of the toxins that are already in your stomach and maybe become discarded while you're eating. Um,
Hmm.
Especially if you're eating fish, it's a good idea to have cheese because it will help absorb anything that's potentially toxic in there. I always recommend deep cold water fish. Obviously, is the best, but yeah, little things like that can help make big gains in your diet. Eating the cheese, and if you know what organs or glands you're having a problem with, then eating those with your meat meals, obviously. So, yeah, I don't think organs are bad. Like I said, I don't eat a lot of them. They're kind of hard to get, honestly. They don't,
Yeah.
you know, they can have, obviously you want a clean organic animal, but they do have organic injections for animals. I found this out
Mm-hmm.
talking to a butcher. So, like, I was buying this liver, I was, letting it rot in a jar, and it would develop these white bumps, this fungus, and the other livers I bought from another butcher where they're not medicated at all, it didn't happen with them. So I asked him, I was like,
Interesting.
I called the farmer and I was talking. He's like, oh, yeah, they get something for pneumonia every year. They get pneumonia, they die. I need to do it because the weather down here, it gets cold, but it doesn't freeze. I'm like, okay, whatever. So it's like, I just won't buy liver from them anymore.
Yeah.
So, but that's the thing. It's like, you can eat organs that have had that. It's not the best. Ajahn has said you could, but he wouldn't do it. But the glands you definitely want to stay from if they've been medicated.
Hmm.
So you see, some of these people eating a lot of weird organs and stuff, and a lot of them, and that's not. I wouldn't say that's healthy to do because they're probably super medicated. If you're getting a
Mm.
lot of organs in that volume from somewhere, they have to be, you know, not exactly factory farm, but they're definitely, I would say, are medicated. So I would stay away from glands that have been medicated at all. Organs, you know, it's your call, but um, the sourcing's an issue. Like I said, it's you got to know the farmers. You got to, or like Amos Miller. That's a good source. It's expensive. It's hard. The availability's kind of tricky, but if you really want to get it, that's probably the easiest place to go.
Sure. Yeah, I'm up in Canada here and it's tough, man. Like there's
Oh,
not much around, like and there obviously the raw milk, anything like raw cheese, you can't order it. Like it's tough, man. It's tough to find good sources and especially where I am on the East Coast, like there's you can do your research and stuff and it's just not maybe they're just not online, but there's not much of it around, so it's tough for sure. But
yeah, I'm sorry to
yeah,
hear
I mean,
that.
it's all part of it too. Trying to find that source is part of it, like, and it's for me, I know it's motivating that I kind of want to raise my own animals and stuff, and like, because you're sure of the source, and obviously that's a whole thing in itself because the system's not designed for you to be able to support yourself like that, and um, because it's expensive and trying to find good farmland. Derek and I talked a little bit about that, but so it's tough, man, and it's like you kind of gotta. A lot of people are gonna have to make compromise, and that's the thing. Like it's like if you're living in a city, it gets even harder too, right? I guess like speaking from my friends and stuff that have told me like just trying to find a good source and it's expensive and so it's tough, man. And but I like the concept of the this unsalted cheese and pulling out the toxins from the gut. I like that. I like the hot baths and I like that this is more than just and I like how we open up the discussion. I like how we talk like it's more than just diet. Like it's good to do the best you can, but living in this polluted world that we live in, it's just it seems discouraging, but you got to get over it, right? And you got to just do your
Hmm.
best because you'll drive yourself crazy trying to strive for perfection, but we have to settle for excellence too. Like you were hinting at earlier. Maybe we can touch on vegetables. What are your thoughts on anti-nutrients? You know, I got a couple buddies that like carnivore, and they're like they question agenus on the vegetable juices. They say they don't like it because the anti-nutrients and things like that. What's your take on that? I think I've watched a couple of your videos on it, and I like the way you talk about it. So
Yeah, I don't really think they're a problem, because okay, so I've done a lot of gardening, and I've seen bugs and animals eat these vegetables. And it's like, okay, so are the anti-nutrients really that big of a problem if they're being eaten, right? And some people would argue, well, that's because our soil's depleted. That's because they, if they were in perfect soil, then they wouldn't be producing that stuff, and they would be producing that stuff, and they wouldn't be eaten. And so I'm like, okay, well, if it's not good soil and they're not producing all those anti-nutrients, then it's not that. Why is it a problem then? And on the other hand, it's like, well, those things are maybe something that's more poisonous to bugs or other animals. Um, and some of that stuff I think is trapped in the fiber, which I don't eat. Right, I just do the juice. I juice it and then
sure.
I filter it through a cheesecloth, so I get most of the fibers out. Um,
Hmm.
the one exception would be like carrot juice. I find that and rhubarb, they have particularly smaller fibers, but they've never given me an issue. A lot of people talk about oxalates, and I don't really think oxalates are the problem, right? I think I've listened to some Weston A. Price talks about this when I go to my local Weston A. Price chapter meeting, and they
Hmm.
talk about oxalates. And someone was, she was like a lifelong vegan, but she had all these other health problems, a lot of pharmaceuticals and treatments and injuries. And then she was like, oh, it's just I'm a vegan and it's the oxalates. It's like, okay, well, like when you cook something, you change it. So it's like, how many cooked vegetables are you eating, right? Things like kiwi and pineapple and tomatoes and blackberries have oxalates. And you can look up 5 different lists and you'll find they won't be the same list. It's like everybody has a different, you know what has more oxalates and what doesn't. It's kind of weird. So in my view, if you look at an oxalate, people say, oh, it's like sharp, it's like glass. It's like, well,
Hmm.
I mean, maybe the oxalates are helping to draw out something in the body. Maybe they're helping to bring out something in the body, because it's like, yeah, I mean, there are poisonous fruits and vegetables. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you can eat anything, but
Yeah.
I mean, things that have been bred in, I guess, not biomechanically engineered, but bred by humans, through selective pollination and stuff,
Hmm.
that, it's they're not bad. Like a lot of people say celery will cause sunburn, and they cite these studies where it's like, oh, there were people working in a field and they were around celery and they got sunburn. It's like, well, buddy, they're outside working all day. What do you think's going to happen? Or people at a grocery store, who are handling celery. It's like, oh, 30% of those people got sunburn. It's like, okay, well, how many other freaking variables are there? It's like,
Yeah.
it was like
Literally infinite.
that's not a very good sample size. And then there's that picture of a baby that's eating celery and its mouth is all red. It's like, okay, well, like I mean, your body's more susceptible to being burned when you're in the water anyway. So it's like whatever kind of water is on your body can magnify the rays and cause burning.
Mhm.
Maybe it's a chemical in there. That's if you just like lather up with celery juice and you go out in the sun, maybe that will burn you. I don't know. But you don't really need to do that, do you? I mean, I work outside, like I said, in the summer, um, and I drink, at least 2 cups of celery juice almost every day, and I don't get burned, you know?
Mm,
So,
yeah.
of course, I'm also eating enough raw fat as well. I'm eating lots of eggs and bone marrow and butter every day. So, having that fat in your adipose tissue, I think helps protect the skin as well. So, I mean, it's a couple different things.
Mm.
I don't
And the
really.
right fat too.
Well, oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not really concerned with the anti-nutrient argument. There's cases of carnivores like lions and stuff, or like even if you just look at dogs who eat grass, they chew on the grass. Um, uh, Animals eating like melons and stuff, wild melons or something. Um, I don't really think it's a big deal. It hasn't negatively impacted my health as far as I can tell. It makes it better. I mean, the vegetable juice is important because it helps, alkalize the blood. It helps clean the blood. It helps with your appetite.
Mm.
So if you're not doing vegetable juice, the problems can mount, right? But again, it's like you have to look at the combinations in the book, figure out what's best for you. I wouldn't tell someone to really drink straight celery juice all the time because it draws out a lot of carbohydrates. For the first couple of years, it might be okay, but then it might cause a energy deficiency because it's pulling out too much energy, too many carbs. Um, so it's why you should add some carrot. 20%,
Mm.
maybe even 40% of your juice, depending on how active you are, depending on how much energy you need. So, I mean, a lack of energy isn't because of the oxalates or anti-nutrients in the celery. It's just a function of what the celery juice does, which is important. And of course, there's like cilantro for heavy metals. Uh, Parsley is especially alkalizing. I think it's got a lot of vitamin A in it, or vitamin E, maybe. I think vitamin E. And let's see here. Carrots for energy also helps detox, the bile. Things like beets and sweet corn help produce hydrochloric acid in your stomach, so it helps your appetite. Ginger, I found, is good for like mental clarity and
Mm.
helps with body odor. Uh, I was juicing a lot of rhubarb this summer. I don't know what it does, but it tastes good. So like experimentation is kind of fun. So I've even juiced kale before. Not a lot, just like 5% of my juice. It adds a nice like I want to say like milkiness, frothiness to the juice. Um, it's very like earthy flavor. Again, no problems with oxalates. Juicing kale, right? We're not eating the fiber, so I don't think like I said, I don't think it's a big deal. I think it's just kind of a meme to sort of like uh, differentiate or you know market like a carnivore diet. Like, oh yeah, it's carnivore. We don't need this. We don't need that. We're carnivores. It's like okay, I mean, whatever. But I mean, like I
It's a
said, you
good
don't.
hook for an Instagram video.
Yeah, I
Kale is
mean,
bullshit.
yeah, I mean, like you can do what you want. I mean, but I'm gonna do what I want,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, that's
I
it.
think my health is fine. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important. Health is individual too. So you like you're putting a lot of emphasis on the fiber. Like it's really the fiber that you find is the bad part of the vegetable, I suppose. Like if
Well,
we were to
yeah,
choose
because
a
you
perfect
can't
demise,
you
is it?
can't digest it. I mean, so I think when people have
Yeah.
these problems, like oh, that kale makes my IBS work up, or whatever, it's like, well, yeah, it's because you're eating a bunch of fiber you can't digest. It's insoluble fiber,
Mm,
especially depending on what you're eating it with. You know, um,
yeah.
like if you're eating it with meat, that's not good. In the primal diet, it does say you can have vegetable fiber, like you can eat salads, but they got to be at the end of the day the last thing you eat. You can't eat it with meat
Okay.
because it will alkalize, everything. But at the end of the day, because it takes long to digest, it kind of pushes everything through. It's for people who have weak bowels or who've had bowel surgeries, who kind of need to have bulk moving through. Because if they don't, from my
Mm,
understanding, it causes like very severe muscle cramps and pain if they don't have anything in their bowels. Um, it really messes
yeah.
them up. So, I mean, yeah, have a salad. It's not going to kill you. I mean, just don't, probably not best to eat it with your meat. It's like in Europe, in France and Italy, they have their salad after their meal. The salad comes after. But here we do it backwards. We do it before. So I don't, or at least in America.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I speculate too that the major problem with plants that is highlighted by, the kind of more mainstream carnivore view is the pesticides and things like that too, right? Like I feel like we're not
mhm,
really, you're not looking at organic people eating organic vegetables and stuff and getting IBS. Like it's usually people eating heavily processed foods and probably, salad from the grocery store covered in seed oils and pesticides. And so really it's like, I don't think the first thing that should be demonized is what's necessarily in the plant either, right? I think like let's look at what we're adding to it too, right? And not to,
right,
put down your point because it's valuable. I'm just thinking like it's like if I'm gonna look at something first, it's like cut the artificial stuff out, right? It's cut the chemicals out. That's really what my go-to is. Like it's like everything artificial is definitely bad for you, is my perspective. Guaranteed. And and when you're looking at what's natural, some things I like the food combination thing, and there's I think Herbert Shelton talked about that too, about food combination, and don't quote me on that. I might be misremembering that, but it's like it makes sense, right? If you're eating the meat and if you're eating meat and if I'm in a more primal setting, it's like I'm not gonna put that meat down to have a bite of some salad, right? It's like I'm gonna go all in on that meat for for that meal, right? It's like that's what my intuition tells me. It's like if I'm gonna have a meat meal, it's like I'm gonna eat the meat and then yeah, like it's kind of natural to be like, oh well, before bed, if I'm a little peckish or if I have gut issues, maybe I'll have some plant medicine or something to look at it in that perspective. So that's just how I look at it, and I think it's just about really cutting the artificial stuff out. And that's when you see people see results. People see results. They go on a raw vegan, they go raw whatever, they go carnivore. It's mostly you see results in the short term on pretty much any elimination diet you go on
mhm,
because you're just eliminating the processed stuff. So, that's undeniable for sure. That's undeniable.
absolutely. That's a big point and distinction to make because a lot of people will attribute it to their diet, but it could just be what they, which I guess is not, wrong to say, but like, yeah, it's like cut out the bad stuff. And when you're eating things that have been sprayed with pesticides and Roundup, that's, going to cause a lot of issues in your gut as well, in your whole body. So let's be honest, it's an elimination thing and trying to source better food, which is hard, like you were saying, kind of wherever you are, unless you're producing it yourself. In Canada, if you
Mhm.
want raw milk, it might be your only choice is to have your own goat or cow. So, or probably the easiest solution. Well, maybe not the easiest, but maybe the most realistic in some respects. So, yeah,
Definitely.
definitely.
Yeah, I drive far for the raw milk, like hour and a half. So it's like, but
Yeah.
stock up and then have like, every few weeks you go and drink a little clab or two, which is all right, like a little of the spoiled milk, which is good and
Oh,
it's fine.
yeah.
It digests really easily and I skim the cream and use it in my baths too. So it's like, you got to make do with what you got, right? It's like, and there might be a time where it's not viable for me to make that drive and that's the way it is and that's the time that there'll be a goat in my front yard.
Awesome. Yeah. I don't really drink too much fresh milk. I get it from my farmer. I request that it's not refrigerated. So, he bottles it up for me, leaves it on the table. So I get my milk
Oh, interesting.
unrefrigerated, which is a big plus because it has some of that growth hormone in it still. I also find it ferments better. It doesn't get bitter. Once it ages really nicely. So I'll put a gallon in the fridge and then I'll put a gallon on the counter and I'll drink that gallon on the counter throughout the week, and then I'll have it's usually that milk in the fridge is usually a week old by then, so it's
Mm,
turned a little bit. Um, so I'm not drinking too much fresh milk now that I've been on the diet for a few years, several years. Um, mostly just doing the fermented. And maybe 2 cups to a quart a day. I used to drink, a half gallon a day or so. Some days I just drink a whole gallon, but I've really, like I said, you got to make changes. It can't be stagnant. So
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah, the one thing I found interesting was the room temperature milk, and it's something that I actually heard about in old Ayurvedic texts. They say not to drink cold milk.
mhm.
And well, then afterwards I heard, Ajahn speaking about it, about drinking the room temperature milk. So what would be the reason behind that? What's the reason Ajahn gives? Do you know that?
Well, it shocks the stomach. It shrinks the stomach, prevents it from producing hydrochloric acid to digest it. So
Hmm.
it's just passed on into the small intestine without being digested from the acids. And I think that's where some people can run into a problem if they have a problem with the lactase or whatever, or the casein,
Oh yeah.
because the casein doesn't get broken down in the small intestine; it gets broken down in the stomach. So if you
Hmm.
pass that into the intestine, it's just getting absorbed. The casein that can cause some people some problems. But I've always had I never had problems with dairy, so I can't really speak to this is better than that is better. But I noticed that I definitely enjoy the clabbered milk more, especially when it's never been refrigerated. Because I think when they
Hmm.
chill it in the vats, it gets down as low as maybe 35 degrees Fahrenheit, which is too cold. It keeps the milk fresh longer, depending on how
Yeah.
much air is in the container, right? But once it starts to ferment or turn, a lot of the bacteria that are responsible for a sweeter fermentation are killed. So you're just left with
Hmm.
a bitter, vomit tasting, sour, bad milk. And you really can't do anything with it. Like I've tried to make cheese with it, and it just tastes awful. It tastes terrible. Um, and the kefir as well. Once it starts to turn, it doesn't really matter how much honey you add to it. It's not enjoyable. So, I can't really go back to drinking that kind of refrigerated fermented milk. It's just terrible. So, yeah,
Yeah, I agree. And my farmer, like I asked, and they know nothing about, Agenus or any of his work, and
sure.
they do that intuitively. They tell me, they say, like, because I told them once, like, back when I was kind of getting into it, I was like, yeah, I want to try and make some fermented milk, some kefir, and they said, yeah, like it doesn't really work well with refrigerated milk. And I thought, oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, and so they make their own kefir, and I just buy it direct from them, like pre-made, and because it's just easy for me and they when they ferment it it's from the room temperature straight from the cow. Usually they make it right away, so it's interesting, right? It's just almost like if you're just going off your intuition and your taste buds too, because
Yeah,
yeah, once it's soured in the fridge it tastes a whole lot different. Like it's you can't mimic it.
yeah. You can't even drink it. It's awful, and I find the whey separates faster too. It's just a
Hmm.
mess. But I think that might be why some people use kefir grains, because I think the kefir grains might be designed
Oh yeah.
with some of those bacteria in mind to help produce a better fermented product. I don't use kefir grains. Sometimes, if I've got a big half gallon of milk out and I'll drink from it, usually that spit is enough to like get it going in a couple days, depending on the temperature, what season it is. But
Hmm.
I think, yeah, I just, I don't really, you can't spit in your milk and it'll ferment better for your biome because your
Yeah.
bacteria is pre-digesting it, so it's built on your bacteria.
Hmm.
But the kefir grains, it's a foreign kind of man-made situation. It's not going to be the best for your gut, honestly.
Sure.
But like you said, you got to make do. If you're not drinking like too much of it, it shouldn't be a problem. But if that was like your main source of milk or dairy, then you might want to reconsider, not using kefir grains. So, because I mean, some people, and you argue with some people, like, oh, well, if you're not using kefir grains, then it's not kefir. because you need to have the yeast in the kefir. It's like, well, the first ways, I guess, in history they recorded kefir was people in Arabia, the Arabs, they would have these leather pouches of milk, and it would just turn into kefir. And that's because the yeast has air in it naturally. So somehow, like, the yeast in the air gets into the milk, and then you can save those grains, right? Or those cultures
Yeah.
from your naturally fermented milk and make more with that. That's probably a better situation than buying something
Hmm.
or even getting kefir grains from somebody, because you never know where do they come from. Like, are they from raw dairy, or are they from someone who bought grains and then from a lab made kefir, saved them, and distributed them. You don't know. So
Yeah. Yeah, one thing I like about, you know, like the primal community is that there is this connection to the food, right? It really is. It's like, if you're gonna make the kefir, you're gonna make sour cream or something, you're using your own saliva or things like that, right? It's really tailored to yourself, and I think that's really important. And I think I would even say that, it would probably be good for your family because when I toy with the idea of the individual microbiome, I think there is a communal microbiome too with your like loved ones and the ones in your household and things like that too, right? So I would speculate that for sure that, it's like those closest to you, it would still have that same benefit too, right? Like that's just kind of my speculation. I don't really have anything to back that up, but
I think that's a good. I think that's a good thought. I think that's valid, because I think that we're more bacteria than human, right?
yeah.
And I'm pretty sure the mother during birth, I don't know if it's in the umbilical cord or something that happens, but she passes on like her bacteria through to the infant,
Hmm.
something like that. I read something like that. I don't know the specifics, but generally something of the mother passing on some bacteria to the newborn baby, and it makes sense. I kind of think about, what if we're just shells for this bacteria hive mind, right? And we're not really like humans at all, like we perceive. It's kind of wild sci-fi out there, but wouldn't that just be kind of wild? Just, yeah, we're just bacteria in, like, literally just bacteria in these human shells, and it's, I don't know, it's just kind of fun to think about. But
Yeah, I know. I kind of share similar ideas too. And yeah, it's more fun than anything. But the truth is that, that we are made up of more microbes than we are cells. So
mhm.
that's not something that's even denied by the modern framework, right? That's like just kind of a known fact, I guess, if you want to call it that. But it's like, obviously there's something greater at play. And then if you're getting into the talk of what is consciousness and thing like that, are we just some collective microbiome consciousness? Well, and at the end of the day too, we are just this extension of the cosmos too, right? Like we're just a part of it all, and we're kind of just the cosmos experience in itself. So
Mhm.
yeah, we could probably get a little philosophical there and tie microbes into it, but might have to save that for another discussion.
Probably, yeah. If you want to look into it, though, it's called a tautology, and
Oh yeah.
something of itself. And I've read a little bit of a book. It's kind of hard to read. It's called the Persephone, and it was written by this scholar in the Middle Ages, maybe not the late Middle Ages, and he essentially was murdered by his university, like his students. They stabbed him with a knife. They got mad at him, but he wrote this book about like the order of creation and how humans are at the highest order of creation because uh, we can create things. We have this
Mm,
consciousness that allows us to create things and bring things into the world, to ideate things, to first ideate things and then make them. Other animals, they don't really have that. So, but I
yeah.
digress.
Yeah, well, and I think that's one of the fundamental things that differentiates us from, animals or microbes. Like animals and microbes adapt to their environment, and this is one of the main you know, points that I stand on within the terrain model. It's like, the bacteria are showing up because of a toxic environment. They are adapting to the environment of the body. If you have some sort of,
Hmm.
infection, right? That's the microbes adapting or growing if you're looking at it from like a pleomorphic perspective. But humans are able to create these conditions, right? We don't necessarily, although we can adapt, we do adapt to our conditions. We can also create them, and that's like a really interesting thing, like because we create these conditions that create the disease conditions, which then nature, has to self-correct, and we're not separate from nature, right? So it's like, and when you're looking at the microbes, I think it's a good way to a good portal to go through when you're looking at this stuff, because it's like if you can understand that, that like the microbes, they're just self-correcting processes. They're at the basis of these self-correcting processes. Like it just connects you, I find, with this deeper intuition of the body. And um, that's why I really like the terrain model for the most part. And I think when you start looking at the microbiome and you start looking at microbes when you're talking about health, you're getting closer to what how to truly heal, right? You're not thinking of pushing away your symptoms, and you're not thinking away like of how to suppress your symptoms, and how to you're looking at detox and looking at the root causes. And I personally think that, the primal diet is a nice gateway there too, because you're really looking at, trying to detox, and you're looking at a more like a softer detox. You don't want to be having all these symptoms and of like a real heavy detox all at once, that all coming out, or detoxing at the wrong time if you're too skinny or whatever it may be. So that's why I really like that. And, even for the average Joe, like, what would you say about someone like, they don't want to go full primal? And, I can understand that perspective too. A lot of people aren't willing to, is there a benefit in, just consuming as much raw food as you can? And what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I don't really think the primal diet is for everyone. I don't really think it will be a mainstream thing for a couple reasons. The availability and cost of food, just the psychology and the programming of modern people. You're never going to have everybody agree on everything.
Mm,
Um, and, that's okay. I'm not
yeah.
really against that. I'm not, I think it's important to speak, but to speak to those who have an open mind who will listen. It doesn't make sense to yell and scream at somebody or chastise somebody who isn't receptive to changing, because you have to have that motivation to make a change in your life to even be receptive to that information. Um, so, I mean, that's really the hardest part, is even just like beginning to like even thinking about it, but then like starting it, following it through, and maintaining it. That's pretty much like
Mm,
the psychology of like change and habits works. So I think it's a good thing to just every time you eat a piece of raw food, it increases your vitality. And I think a lot of people get lost in the you know oh, I didn't eat my cheese 10 minutes before my meat meal, or I put in an extra teaspoon apple cider vinegar into my hydration formula, or I don't know, I didn't eat my fat with my meat. It's like, or like, oh, I ate. Perfect example. I ate Thanksgiving dinner with my family. Oh no, I'm gonna die. It's like
yeah.
that's
Not
like
helpful.
one cooked meat, like eating a little cooked food with your family isn't gonna kill you, right? It's not gonna eating, it's not going to make you stop eating the diet unless you want to, right? It's like you're responsible for your own choices. When I first started the diet, I think a year or two into it, I ate a dinner with the fam, and it was okay. I remember the meat being dry. I remember, I mean, not that it was cooked wrong, my family's pretty good with food, and
Yeah.
but just the following 3 days, man, it was like real large, dry, uncomfortable bowel movements. Like I was like, man, I'm never doing this again. I can't do this again. I don't want to. Like it was like detoxing cooked food, right? It was not pleasurable. It's like it's not worth it. It's like I can't. My gut has changed. It doesn't
Mm,
it doesn't do well with cooked food. Maybe I've never really done well with cooked food, which is why I could never gain weight. Which is
interesting.
why I had all these other problems. Um, but now I don't really have that. So, you know, I I'm not. But it's like people need to realize too. Autogenous, very few people, okay, were on the diet 100% of his clients,
Sure.
and even fewer of them stayed on the diet for a long time. I've talked to several individuals who have been on the diet for 20 plus years, and they found a lot of that too. Catching up with other people who've been on the diet, and they're like, he was talking to one guy who was on the diet, 100% for 20 years, and he stopped. He's like, yeah, he's smoking and drinking again. He says he feels great. He's having a good time. He wants to enjoy life. It's like, hey, God bless him. I mean, you get to a point where you want to be with your health. Nobody lives forever. It's like who am I to judge? But this I don't know. It's like you kind of have to have dogma in a way to establish things in the diet. I think is important, but to try to force that dogma onto people or chastise people for trying to do the best they can because of their situation or whatever, is not healthy. It's not good. So, I mean, anytime you eat a piece of raw food, it increases your vitality, and that's a win. And eliminating a lot of the bad stuff in your environment, is it's probably even a bigger win, to be honest, because the reason we're on this diet or we're doing this diet and we're eating all this fat is because of everything in our environment. So if you can move out somewhere that's pretty clean and, you're sourcing your own food, growing most of your food, or getting it local, what do you really have to worry about? You're not going to the doctor getting pharmaceuticals. I mean, you don't really have much to worry about at that point.
Yeah.
Of course, like, yeah, it was in this guy, a book Autogenous mentions is Enzyme Nutrition by Dr. Howell. And he was the first guy, I think this came out in the 50s or 60s, to kind of explain how enzymes work in the body and how our bodies are basically a battery with a set amount of energy. And stressing your body uses up that energy essentially, whether it's through stress or toxins or cooked foods, like because your pancreas deals with a lot of protein digestion and assimilation. So like when you're eating cooked proteins, your pancreas has to borrow energy because you're not getting the energy from the foods from your body to make those proteins digestible and absorbable. So you're basically in
Mm,
this negative feedback loop with cooked food. Yeah, I mean, yes, that's true, but I mean, like I've lived in Nepal, for example, or traveled a long time, and I'd see people who are like 80, 90 years old living mostly on like lentils and rice, and
yeah.
they're carrying up giant you know like well, maybe not the people who are that old, but even people who are still like 40, 50, they're what do they call it? Porters. So it's like, I need someone to carry a bunch of stuff across town, a couple miles, and you can't use cars. It's not set up for cars, but they just load these people up on their backs, and it's like 12 feet of stuff on their back, and they're just walking around with that. It's like, wow, that's a lot. Or people climbing up mountains. Like I've ran into several older folks, probably in their 70s or 80s, just on a casual stroll through the mountains, where I'm like really working. It's tough, and the
Yeah.
guy's, he's smoking a cigarette, right?
Yeah.
So, it's like,
Yeah.
how much, where does health come from? Where does the detriments to health come from? It's you have to be a little bit more open minded and celebrate the wins. Like you said, you don't want to stress yourself out about, this or that or, every little thing because you're going to go crazy. So you have to have a healthy relationship with food. You have to be realistic about your goals. It's like
Yeah,
you live somewhere where raw milk isn't accessible, but you're willing to make it happen. Some people may not be willing to make it happen, or they can't make it
that's
happen.
it.
And
Yeah,
you know what? If all they can do is eat raw meat and drink vegetable juice and eggs, that's better than a lot of things. Just because you can't
yeah,
get raw dairy doesn't mean you can't do these other parts of the diet. Just because you can't get good meat doesn't mean you can't drink raw milk. So it's like, or do the raw eggs. So you just got to do what you can and what you want to do. I mean, it's hard to force yourself to do things you don't want to do. And a lot of people don't want to do that. I don't really blame them, but like for instance, I would probably benefit from eating rotten eggs, but I'm not going to eat rotten eggs because it's god awful. I've tried to slonk eggs before, and they were rotten. I didn't know it, and just you just instantly just your mouth is filled with this black green, just absolutely putrid junk, and I'm almost like vomiting.
yeah.
Rotten meat's better than rotten eggs by far. Like I just can never do it. It's awful. So yeah. Now when
It's
I
good
crack my
balance too.
eggs, I always smell them before I
Oh yeah,
ingest them, just so I learned the hard way. So, but yeah, it's like
tip.
yeah, I would benefit from eating rotten eggs. Am I going to do it? No way. No way. So that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we've come full circle here, so I think this might be a good time to wrap it up. Eat raw meat. Thank you so much for coming on. You very insightful. I think this was a great discussion.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad you found it useful. I hope people watching find it useful. Remember to check out primaldiet.net. It's a great source of information. You can look through and buy a lot of Audrey's works, and I think there's some forums there which can be useful, connecting with people, food sources, and yeah, just nice little website. So check it out.
Yeah. And how can they find you?
Well, I'm on YouTube and mostly just YouTube. Eat raw meat, primal diet advice. The content I make is really geared towards the primal diet. It's not, I don't make content to broadcast to the world. I just do it for people who are on the primal diet because that's where my expertise is. It doesn't make sense to try to make it for everybody, as I mentioned before. So I just kind of spend my time doing that. And I try to post at least once a month or once a week or so. Recently, there was a big controversy about the Bragg's apple cider vinegar and the appeal. Um,
Yes.
and basically, it's all just a bunch of BS rumors. There's no proof behind it. And I call it Bragg's. I took notes. I talked to the lady who's been there for 10 years and basically explained what's going on there, which is not you know Bill Gates has nothing to do with Bragg's. Just because a couple multimillionaires have overlapping business interests in some sectors doesn't mean they're plotting against and poisoning people. And it doesn't really make sense to buy apples straight from the farm in Washington, Oregon, and California, send them to get processed with a peel, and then ship them back to your processing facility. The business logistics don't really add up there either.
Especially for making apple cider vinegar too, right? You can use the ground apples for that.
Yeah, exactly. The seconds. So yeah, the retail apples and the apples for vinegars and sauces, not the same thing. And Katy Perry isn't even involved in the day to day operations. She's just an investor because her family, her mom and dad were family friends with the Braggs from church for like decades. So that's the only
Oh,
reason she
interesting.
got in there, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I think you
that's
did,
yeah.
and maybe it was you that mentioned it, but they do use tap water. I think was that you
Yep.
that mentioned it? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's in the
So
video.
I guess
That's
the one
the
downfall.
one downside. Yeah, I tried to ask him. I was like, "What kind of water is it?" And it took a couple questions to kind of get it out. And we're like, "Oh yeah, it's just tap water." Um, I think they used to use distilled at one point, but they switched to tap water. But I haven't tried Fairchild's brand. I've looked for it. I noticed Bragg's was on sale at Whole Foods, by the way, which is kind of funny. The shelf was pretty full. It was marked down to like
Oh yeah.
5.13. So I mean, they're hurting. It's just kind of silly about these silly internet rumors. Really affecting their. I mean, it's not a bad brand, but you can really decide if that amount of tap water in your vinegar is detrimental. I don't. I mostly use it for the baths. I buy the gallon container, and I'm already
Yeah.
putting it in the tap water. So I hardly ever
Yeah.
drink it or put it in formulas. But so, like I said,
Fair
it's all
enough.
personal choices with health and your pros and
That's it.
cons and what you want to do. So
Awesome. All right. We're gonna wrap it up. So I want to thank the listener. Um, Everyone should know that this is not medical advice. It's for general informational purposes only. But you also remember that we are responsible, sovereign beings capable of thinking, criticizing, and understanding absolutely anything. Health is individual. You got to go and you got to learn. You're an expert in your on your body, right? And that was one of the messages today. It's you got to go and you got to put the work in yourself and take some responsibility. And that's one of the messages that this podcast pushes out too. So don't think that you're not capable because you are. We, the people, and the greater forces are together self healers, self governable, self teachers, and so much more. Always reach out if you have any questions, criticisms, comments, whatever. I'd love to chat. I'm on beyond.terrain on Instagram. And listen, I truly appreciate everyone that took the time to listen today. If you made it to the end, if you enjoyed the podcast, found it informative in any way, give us a like, share, comment, review, whatever you got to do on your platform. Help me grow, get this message out. And remember, there are two types of people in this world: those who think they can, those who think they can't, and they're both correct. All right, guys, thanks for listening. Take care.